So I've finished treating the inside of the cab with KBS. I haven't used that product before, so I was on a very steep learning curve. Now, while I really trust that it is going to protect the metal, I can't say that I'm entirely happy with the end result. So Trixie is finally ready for the KBS. I have finished grinding after many, many hours. If I'm honest, I'm glad that's over. It was interesting learning, but it was also just dragging on, and I am so ready for a change of pace and a change of scenery. Today I have finished sandpapering off some of the paint that I didn't get with the grinder. Not all of the paint is off. It is all scuffed up, ready to be painted again with the KBS, but where I left the paint on, there really was no rust there anyway. So I've blown out the dust from sort of the tight little crevices and gaps with the air compressor, and then I've just vacuumed up everything that I could. So it is ready for the first step of KBS, which hopefully will be tomorrow, and that is the AquaKlean, and that's just to wash out everything and prepare it for the second step of the RustBlast. And when I get to that stage, I will be super happy and very excited, because it really does mean the end of a very long, drawn-out process of doing the inside of this cab completely manually by hand. I can understand why people want to go the sandblasting route, I really do. I don't really regret choosing not to, because I think it was a good way to really intimately get to know the cab and understand where rust is forming and maybe why. And, you know, that's just part of the way I wanted this project to go. I've got the first step of KBS mixed up. It's the AquaKlean, and I diluted it at kind of the moderate level of dilution they recommended, because I don't think I've got a really, really bad cleanup job, but it's also not a very light cleanup job. And that dilution is about 1 part to 5. I made it a little bit more concentrated than that, but it's in a spray bottle so that it should be easy to apply, particularly up underneath the dash. It's fair to say I did not strip 100% of the paint off this, and really there are a lot of places where it just didn't need it, and I scuffed it back instead with some sandpaper, and that'll just make it easy for the KBS RustSeal to stick to everything. I've got a couple of buckets of water and some clean sponges ready, because the AquaKlean is not supposed to dry on the metal. You need to wash that off with fresh water after you've scrubbed. So we'll see how much of the cab I can do at any one time. I think I'll probably just do under the dash first and then clean all of that off with fresh water, and then maybe the firewall, and then possibly just do one side of the floor pan and then the other side of the floor pan. I don't really know how long this is going to take, and I guess it doesn't really matter. I'll just get started. Well, that's half the cab done now with the AquaKlean. What worked best for up in these little tight spaces was the scourer that I sprayed with the AquaKlean, because I wanted to be careful spraying it around in here, because I didn't want it to end up down into little places where I couldn't wash it out of. So I used a scourer and a rag just to keep it wet, and just working over it really, back and forth with the scourer and the rag. The idea being to keep it saturated for at least 10 minutes, and I think in the end I probably kept most of it saturated for probably 15 to 20 minutes. But because I was working here and it was all dripping down, I just kind of kept going down. And then when I was happy enough that I'd rinsed off all of the dash and the firewall, I then just sprayed the AquaKlean all over the floor pan on this side and up into the back corners there, and just kept scrubbing with the scourer. Down here I used the big sponge to wash it clean. The big sponge didn't fit up under the dash, that's what the rags were for. But then on the floor, just using the sponge saturated with fresh water was enough to wash it clean. And really wiping over it after I'd done all that, mostly the rag and the sponge are coming off really clean. So I'm happy that it's done a good enough job and I'm not going to have to retreat it. So now I just have the other half of the cab to do. Did anyone notice that I had forgotten to take out the floor drain plugs? I had every intention of doing it, it just keeps skipping my mind. Then I just looked at it and realised they were there, so I had to get them out and scrape up those holes a little bit. There's no rust in there, which is great. In fact, I think I'm the first person to take them off because there was that old looking seam sealer around them as well. Anyway, I took them off and I just re-washed those parts of the floor on this side. And the only other place I have one is on the passenger side there, because that new floor pan that a previous owner put in doesn't have the drain. But all good, got it in time, that's all that matters. Well, that's it. Step 1 of KBS is done. The AquaKlean has been applied, scrubbed for, well, 10 to 20 minutes, I guess, on just about all the surfaces, and I've washed it off with water. If you're curious, I went through 4 buckets of water to kind of rinse it all off, and a big sponge and a bunch of clean rags. That was pretty much it. Just waiting for it to dry now. I did rag dry it, just to get all the obvious moisture off, but there are still like little corners back in there. I really want to give them a chance to dry out well. I may get the air compressor out again and just accelerate that, but we'll see. But my hope is that this afternoon I'll get the next step, which is RustBlast, applied and rinsed off. So then I can just leave it for today, and when I'm ready, come back and do the third step of the RustSeal. One thing that makes me wonder if I did use enough of this product on the floor is that out of this 1 litre that comes with what is the chassis coater kit, I only used about 250 mil out of that litre, and I still had probably half of my solution left over. Hopefully I used enough, like the rags came off clean toward the end, so I'm hopeful that it was enough. And with the leftovers, I guess I'll be doing the firewall and underneath the cab, but I doubt that I'll be able to finish the entire chassis with the leftovers as well, so I guess I'll be buying more. Specifically with a 1-tonner, which has a full chassis. Okay, so she's marinating in the RustBlast now. That's this, came with a pump, which is great. So I've just saturated it everywhere I can and massaged it in with a scourer again. And it's interesting, it kind of, for the flash rust that's happened since I stripped the floor, it just kind of virtually melted that away. That was amazing. But the older rust, that's a little bit deeper, a bit of pitting there, and it's really just going kind of a blackish colour. I guess that's what most rust treatments do. But hopefully it's killing it. So the inside of the cab is now saturated with RustBlast, and my plan is to leave it for at least an hour. For moderately rusted surfaces, I think KBS say to leave it for at least 20 minutes. And really, with all of the grinding that I did to remove the rust inside the cab, I probably don't really need to leave it for an hour, but better safe than sorry, I reckon. Then I can just use wet rags to wipe it off and then let it completely dry. So that means I'll be done for the day, and with any luck in the next day or two I can come back and get on with step 3, which is paint it with the RustSeal. That is what the RustBlast looks like once it's pretty much dry. Like, it's still drying in places, and back in these little corners it's still wet. But where it's dry, it's doing what I think it's supposed to do, which is have that sort of powdery coating, which I think is a zinc phosphate and part of the etching process that helps the RustSeal adhere to it. I don't know if I've got too much of that left, which might mean I didn't wash it enough. I'm not really sure, but I'm going to leave it, let it dry, and maybe do a bit of research in the meantime. It didn't take a lot of effort really to keep it wet. I was worried that I wouldn't be able to keep up with it. I shut the roller doors so the sun wasn't shining on it, and that meant it stayed wetter for longer. But I just walked around with the spray bottle really and just kept touching it up every few minutes if I saw it drying. No big deal, pretty easy really. I'm going to let that sit now for a day, I guess, to make sure that it is really, really dry. But according to the instructions, I could leave it for up to 30 days like that before I coat it with the RustSeal. I don't want to do that. I would so love to have that finished this weekend and get the RustSeal painted on tomorrow. 2 coats of that, I'm thinking. And I think there's only like a couple of hours between coats, so I should be able to knock it off in a day pretty easily. That powdery coating, the zinc phosphate, is very, very obvious. I don't know if there's too much there. It does kind of come off on your finger a little bit. There were a few places where it was a little bit thick and I kind of brushed it and vacuumed it up. But really there are only a few places that were like that. I'm not sure what this goldish kind of tint is, whether that's just part of the reaction. It's not really the same colour as rust's. So right down in those back corners there, I am pretty relieved to see that it has really converted the rust back there. There wasn't much, there was a little bit, but in a corner like that, I get a bit nervous about what might happen to it over time, but it seems to have really nipped that in the bud, and I think the RustSeal will just finish that off. Now, I don't want to lay on this, which I'd have to do to get a proper coating of the RustSeal up underneath all of these bits and in behind the dash frame. So my plan is to just get the floor coated with the 2 coats. I'll see how far I can reach. If I can get up the firewall, I will do that. But then I'll get the seam sealer on after the 2 coats of the RustSeal, and then just let it cure. And then I will come back in here and I'll be able to safely lay on the floor and do the second stage of the RustSeal up underneath the dash. So that's the first coat of the RustSeal done. It definitely is self-leveling. I can't see any brush strokes anywhere, and it's just as well it's self-leveling because it's relatively thick, and rather than painting, it feels more like massaging, kind of pushing it into the metal. Admittedly, this metal was not a very smooth surface to start with, but yeah, it looks fantastic. Like, this is just one coat and it already looks nice and thick. I did go a little bit further than just the floor because I had leftover paint and I just wanted to use it up. So I went over the dash frame and anywhere else that I could kind of reach from outside the cab. I think the only thing that I have not done very well is there's some runs. Not really bad ones, and honestly it's not going to matter. There will be floor covering over this, and once the dash is in, it's never going to be seen again probably. But I don't have a lot of light inside the cab. The battery went flat and I just didn't pick them up. So yeah, there are a few runs unfortunately. But I'm pretty happy and feeling happier because this is kind of progress. It feels like I'm going to be soon ready to move on to something a bit different than working inside this cab. I'm not super happy with how it turned out. The first coat of the RustSeal was really nice. It went on nice and smooth and it leveled out beautifully, but the second coat didn't. The paint just seemed to be a little bit thicker, or went on a little bit thicker, and I had to go a lot slower, and I'm not sure that helped. But at least everything is sealed and protected, and that's what matters most, especially given that the interior of this cab is just going to get covered with carpet and a new dash and all that kind of thing. So no one's ever going to see it again, probably. I'm glad that I practiced using the KBS on the inside where no one is going to see it, because I do plan on using it on the firewall and on the underside of the cab next. And having learned a couple of things, I hope that it'll have a much nicer finish on the outside of the cab than I managed to get it on the inside. And that's not the product's fault. That's entirely me being a newbie to this and not really knowing exactly what was going to happen and what to do about it when it did. So I finished 2 coats of the KBS RustSeal up underneath the dash. I'd be lying if I said I was really happy with the result. It's not the product necessarily that I'm unhappy with. I bought some of the KBS thinners after last weekend's debacle with the second coat on the floor, getting brush marks that didn't self-level out. The RustSeal had gotten too thick for whatever reason, and this time round the thinners really kept it at a really good consistency. And the second coat under the dash did self-level, which is great. However, I could not get control of the drips. So I tried to keep up with them, but they all had a mind of their own about when they were going to drip down. And the reason there were drips in the first place is because underneath all the dash, there's a lot of holes that the brush will rub against and a drip will come through the hole. There are a lot of gaps, like between the bottom of the plenum and the firewall, where I pushed paint up inside of there. And of course too much paint's going to go in there, I knew that, and I thought I'd be able to keep up with all of the drips. I just didn't. So it really is not a professional looking job, not by a long shot. I think I'd be embarrassed if anyone came in and had a look at it, to be quite honest. Thank goodness it's all going to be covered. I think it's more the nature of the beast, Trixie being the beast, because spaces like under the dash, doing it with a brush it's a messy job. It's really hard to get the paint into some of the areas, you've got to have the brush at all kinds of weird angles, and you end up rubbing paint that you've already put on there, and it's hard to keep up with where you finished painting something and had to sort of keep going in one direction, but when you go back in the other direction, you're kind of touching against paint that's already, or RustSeal technically, that's already started to cure. So it was a very finicky job. I guess I enjoyed the learning, but I can't say I really enjoyed the mess. I really trust that the metal is protected though. I'm sure I did the first 2 steps correctly with the cleaning, and then the AquaKlean, and then with the RustBlast. And the fact that the RustSeal is on there with 2 reasonable coats, that's got to be a good thing. And I really did give priority to pushing the paint into every little crevice and corner and crack that I could, over trying to make it look really pretty. So as far as its purpose, it's serving that. Like, the cab is protected on the inside now. But because of the finish, it's got me second guessing what I do next. I was going to do the front of the firewall, but to me that's super important to get a very excellent finish with the paint there, especially with a rebuilt Holden 308. That's going to be sitting in that engine bay looking very special. It would look terrible against a really bad backdrop of a firewall with patchy finish and runs and brush marks and whatever. So I'm thinking I might flip Trixie on her back and work on the floor, the underneath of the floor, with the KBS first, just to get a bit more practice in. I am undecided whether I will continue using a brush. I may invest in a decent compressor, and possibly I will need a bigger generator down here at the Z shed, which doesn't have any electricity. And then maybe I'll practice some spray painting and spray paint the underside. I really think the firewall's probably got to be spray painted to make sure that it really is a good finish. Anyway, I'll decide that later. I'm hoping that in the light of a new day I'll feel better about the result here. The aesthetics of it, I guess, because I am happy with the thoroughness of it. There's no doubt about that. Anyway, good news is that I've bought a cam kit for the 308 because the L34 heads have passed the crack test, which means they're now being machined and prepared, and assembly of the 308 can probably start within a few weeks, which is pretty exciting. So stay tuned if you're interested to learn more about that. And until the next video, I hope you have more luck with your project than I feel like I've had with this one recently.